Zohran Mamdani's story begins far from Manhattan skyscrapers. He was born on October 18, 1991, in Kampala, Uganda. His parents, both of Indian descent, lend richness to his global and cultural upbringing. His father, Mahmoud Mamdani, is a noted scholar of post-colonialism, born in Bombay and raised partly in Uganda. His mother, Meera Nair, is an acclaimed Indian-American filmmaker from Rourkela, India. His middle name, Kwame, is a nod to the Ghanaian leader Kwame Nkrumah, a deliberate choice by his father, signaling an embrace of African identity and liberation politics. Childhood in Africa, Uganda to South Africa. Although born in Uganda, Mamdani's early years were not static. The family moved, when he was about 5, to Cape Town, South Africa, following his father's academic appointment. Growing up in Cape Town exposed young Zohran to a different kind of world, one with the legacies of apartheid, deep racial divides, and a mix of cultures. He later told interviewers this early exposure to African context helped shape his worldview. Arrival in New York and formative schooling. By the time Zohran was roughly 7, the family relocated to the United States, settling in New York City. He attended the Bank Street School for Children in Manhattan, known for its progressive teaching methods. Later, his high school years were spent at the prestigious Bronx High School of Science, where academic rigor met his early stirrings of activism. He co-founded a chapter of the student organization Students for Justice in Palestine, organizing and participating in academic and social justice debates. His studies and activism were influenced by his father's scholarship on colonialism and his mother's storytelling heritage, a blend of academic theory and creative awareness. His youth was steeped in conversations about justice, migration, identity. Life before politics, music, housing counseling, grassroots. Before stepping into elected office, Mamdani's work was varied and rather unconventional for a future politician. He worked as a foreclosure prevention counselor in Queens, helping immigrant families and low-income households navigate post-2008 economic turmoil. He also ventured into music. Under the moniker Young Cardamom, also Mr. Cardamom, he collaborated with Ugandan rapper Hab on a 2016 EP, blending English and Luganda in the tracks. He briefly worked on one of his mother's film productions as a music supervisor. These experiences, grassroots counseling, artistic experimentation, and global upbringing add texture to his political persona. He wasn't always inside traditional political pipelines. Family legacy and influence. Mamdani's family isn't just background noise. It's central to how he sees the world. His father, Mahmoud Mamdani, is a major figure in African studies and post-colonial theory. His mother, Meera Nair, has given voice to diasporic stories through cinema. Growing up in a home where global history, cultural displacement, diaspora narratives, and storytelling were dinner table talk meant that Zohran absorbed ideas about justice, identity, and global systems early. Critics sometimes describe him as Nepo-connected, given his high-profile parents. But he frames it differently, a responsibility to act on the world his upbringing revealed. What the early years tell us about his politics. His upbringing across continents, his schooling in progressive environments, his activism during college, and his early work with housing point to key themes. Affordability and housing justice. His foreclosure counseling role embedded him in the realities of economic vulnerability. Intersectional identity and diaspora politics. A Ugandan-born Indian American with Muslim faith and African roots. His life narrative gives him a unique vantage on migration, belonging, racial justice. Cultural fluency. His musical project and participation in creative spaces reflect a comfort with hybridity, expression, non-traditional pathways. Global historical consciousness. His family and early environment rooted him in post-colonial studies, migration, African diasporas, not just local politics. When he talks about affordability, racial justice, housing, immigration, his story gives more than headlines. It gives lived context. He co-founded his high school's first cricket team, a sport rare in NYC's high schools. His rap song Conda, Chap Chap, with Hab, used chapati, an Indian-adopted Ugandan staple, as its metaphor, blending cultures. His family moved from Uganda to South Africa to New York, meaning by age 7 he had already lived in 3 countries. That mobility shaped how he views home, community, and belonging. Although raised in a relatively affluent intellectual surroundings, he chose to live and work in rent-stabilized Astoria, Queens, rather than remain solely within his elite family's orbit. The origin story is often glossed over in politics. Polished talking points, campaign slogans, soundbite credentials. But looking deeper into Mamdani's life reveals why he gravitated towards democratic socialist ideas. His father's work on colonial legacies, his mother's focus on diaspora stories, his own lived multicultural reality. Why his politics emphasize affordability, housing, transit, social equity. Because he saw firsthand the precarity of immigrant families in Queens and economic vulnerability. Why he speaks with fluency across communities. Because his upbringing straddled continents and cultures. Why his narrative resonates with younger global-minded voters. He embodies hybridity, global citizenship, non-traditional pathways. In short, you don't simply get Zohran Mamdani by looking at his campaign platform or legislative record. You understand him when you trace the contours of his upbringing, the cultures he inhabited, the early jobs he took, the family influences he absorbed. Of course, the same backstory that gives him depth also opens questions. Critics argue his early careers, music, brief work stints show limited conventional experience in governments. The global mobility and elite schooling might be framed as out of touch by opponents, yet he counters that by choosing to live and work in Queens and emphasize grassroots housing work. His multi-identity approach can be a strength, but can also raise questions for voters seeking simple, singular identities or homegrown narratives. So yes, you thought you knew Mamdani, the young progressive New York politician making waves. But dig deeper, and what you find is a life that spans Uganda, South Africa, India, the United States, a childhood immersed in ideas of diaspora and post-colonialism, creative explorations in music, early advocacy in housing justice, and a conscious decision to situate himself among the working-class communities of Queens, rather than remain solely within his elite family's orbit. That hidden backstory may very well shape how he leads, because it gave him a vantage many lack: a layered global perspective, comfort with cultural complexity, and direct exposure to how systems of inequality play out on the ground. If he succeeds, his narrative won't just be about policies. It'll be about someone whose identity is a microcosm of the many he claims to represent. If he stumbles, critics will point not just to specific decisions, but to whether someone with his background can translate global consciousness into gritty city governance. Either way, the story behind the man is worth knowing, because it helps us anticipate how he might lead, why he chose certain issues, and whether his approach is rooted in lived experience or just polished presentation.